And welcome everybody. Thank you for coming today. And today we are going to talk about, well, I had a hard time putting this in just a couple words. We're going to talk about taking it slow and knowing who you're working with as a relationship skill, and particularly a skill that we're poised to develop in recovery. Um, so this last weekend, I took a little break from my normal life, and I attended a trail building class, um, like hiking, mountain biking, horse trails type stuff. I'm really involved with the trails community where I live, and a little bit better, and to have a more quality user experience. So we hired this expert who's been building trails for the Forest Service for 50 years, and we all showed up to the first day in our work boots and gloves, and we had trucks full of tools, thinking we're going to go out on the trails and we're going to move dirt, and we're going to improve the trails. um, we spent, of the 4 days of the class, we spent 2.5 days in the classroom learning the why trails are built in a certain way, um, who has vested interest, and all of that. And what I came to realize pretty quickly, which I think it has to do with my profession, but it's become my hunch that just about everything is about relationships. If you want to get something done, it really comes down to the relationships with the people who you're trying to do that with, or who you're trying to get to buy in. And building trails is no different. Um, about halfway through the class, we had a vocal majority um, expressed their dissatisfaction that we were going to take a trail building class and not develop any blisters, or go hike around for miles and miles. Um, and this expert teacher, he played it just like an expert, and he said, you'll see. And we went on with the class, and by the end of the class yesterday, everyone was saying, I'm so glad I have this basic knowledge and I understand why we do things the way that we do. That way, when I go out and fix trails, I can actually fix root problems instead of just putting a band-aid over it. So today I'm going to talk about some of what I learned, not about building classes or building trails, but what I learned from that class about how to manage relationships and getting work done, which is what all of our relationships are about. Um, if you're in a committed relationship, hopefully you love that person, and that's beautiful and that's wonderful, but that's not the reason why you're together. Stan Tatkin, who wrote Wired for Love and a lot of other really great books on relationships, says that love by itself is wholly insufficient to keep a relationship going, because really you're together to accomplish something. You're together to get some work done. So um, one of the reasons why I think it's really important to first slow down is because ultimately you have to know who you're in a relationship with, not who you want to be in a relationship with, or who you're in a relationship with and what you want them to be, but who you're in a relationship with right now. One of the reasons why that's really, really hard to see is because in any relationship interaction, there's like a million micro interactions going on that are all nonverbal. And most of them are sub-psychological, meaning you can't detect them unless you really look for it and you really try to detect them. Um, so you won't have a chance to see what happens unless you slow the whole process down. So first of all, I think it's important to know yourself when you're starting to speed up, when you're starting to rev up, and how to slow down just enough to take the edge off of that. So some good places to start with keeping it slow in relationships, or keeping it slow in your relationship interactions, is make sure you're breathing. Um, you may not recognize this unless you've had some attention drawn to it before, or even had some training or some help on it. But when you're stressed and when you start to tense, most people literally stop breathing, not for enough time to like pass out, but really we hold our breaths when we're bracing for impact. Talk about those little physiological and psychological cues that set off this cascade of response. When you stop breathing, you're telling your body, brace for impact, this is going to be bad. So learning how to keep breathing through what's going on, or anything that's going on, that's a really great skill to keep it slow internally in this relationship interaction. So focus on the in breath, focus on the out breath. A really effective out breath to slow things down is a slow, deliberate exhale. When you do that slower exhale, you're engaging your parasympathetic nervous system or the braking system in your body. That's invaluable in any relationship interaction. Keep that breath going, keep that breath calm, not because you shouldn't be experiencing any emotion, but calm. But if you slow it down, you can not only feel what you're feeling, but you can recognize what you're feeling and you can choose what to do with it. The second thing that really helps to slow it down is to keep the 10,000 foot view in mind. Um, what's happening right now? Maybe you're arguing with your spouse over the amount of recovery that you or they are involved in. What's the appropriate amount of recovery? That's really not what the fight's all about. That fight is a manifestation of this in this moment of issues and relationships and things that cover a wide, like there's a larger landscape. So it's important in a relationship, whether it's your romantic partner, whether it's people in your recovery circles, whether it's your boss, your coworkers, your employees, your family, whoever that is, remember that this person came from a context and you came from a context. There's a wider story as to why people respond the way that they do. It can be really, really frustrating in a relationship to make a request and have the person respond to you with something like, well, don't tell me what to do. And then it's this battle of wills back and forth. Well, my guess is there's a 9 to 1 or better chance that that person isn't responding the way they're responding just because they're a jerk. But there's a story about how they came by that response honestly. And it's important to remember that there's a whole history of why this person does what they do. That history is not to excuse why they do what they do, but to help you understand that maybe you're up against something a little bit bigger than just getting this job right here and now done. So in my trail building class, we actually learned part of the history of the Forest Service because a lot of trails we want to build are on Forest Service land. Learning the history of that agency helped me understand why, when I talk to the district ranger, why he responds the way that he does. It's largely not a personality thing. In essence, it's a family thing. He came from a certain family, that like a professional family, and they have rules and norms. And when I understand more about that, I can understand how to put fears to bed or to give reassurances or to know how to push and when to push in a way that he'll actually respond to instead of the way that I think he should. So when you have the 10,000 foot view, you can see a little more clearly what your opportunities are and what the parts are that you definitely want to stay away from, or if you go there, you have to go there really gently if you want this person to continue collaborating with you. The next part that I think helps keep the process slowed down is to have a fair witness for yourself. So when you're interacting with a high stakes relationship or a relationship that brings up a lot of emotion for you, your support network will help you stay grounded in that process. This could be as simple as somebody to vent to who's really going to let you vent. They're not going to jump on the hate and complaint wagon and tell you to railroad this person out of town, but they'll listen. Gosh, that sounds really hard. I can see that you're frustrated. Having a fair witness for these relationship interactions can help you to take some of that processing out of the relationship where it might not be useful right now, but still allow you to get it done. So this is where a sponsor, a therapist, other support people, sometimes I think coworkers, like if we're talking about in your place of work, if your coworkers know what this boss is like or the supervisor is like, and you can vent, oh, they're doing that thing again, and yeah, I know how that feels. That can really help to keep it slow because you're not all alone. One of the most dangerous things for human beings on a physiological level is to recognize that we're alone, handling or trying to confront a problem that's bigger than us. So keeping a sense of community and utilizing that community as fair witnesses, again, not as people who are going to jump on the bandwagon and not hold you accountable, but people who really empathize with you, that can help keep it slow. Overall, and this is, I think, an early recovery thing, if you know what your objective is and you know the principles that you're going to follow to get there, you can check yourself against, how am I doing with regards to my objective? Am I accountable to what's important to me? Am I a person of integrity right now? Or am I just about getting this done because I want to get it done? So for example, if your objective in recovery is just to get sober, first of all, you're probably just starting out, and that's a fine objective, and that's probably what you need to focus on. Later on, as recovery goes on, life is about so much more than just being sober. A friend of mine says you can be sober and still be the weird, creepy person in the 12-step room because you're not focusing on relationships or emotional health. So let's say that your objective with your partner is, um, at the end of the day, I want us to have a relationship where we feel like we have each other's back. I want us to have solidarity. That's my objective here. Um, so when that's your objective and your fair witnesses know about that, and you're talking about the recent fight that you have, you may find yourself behaving out of joint with your objective. I want there to be solidarity, but I totally cut my partner down because I don't like what they're doing. Or I think they should have their family stuff figured out. Well, that's not really solidarity. If you want it to be a part of your relationship, you have to be the first person in line to give it, regardless of whether that person's giving it or not. Um, the exception to that, I would say, if that puts you in a position of vulnerability where you can be abused or exploited, you might want to rethink what you're giving to this other person in your relationship. But generally, if you know what your objective is, you can stay accountable and you can organize around these principles rather than getting hung up on what's the one thing in front of me here. A lot of times we pick the one thing that's in front of us and we die on that hill, and it's not necessarily the hill that's most important to us. So knowing your objective and staying accountable can also help keep it slow. This next one, this takes some buy-in from your partner, and this might be where, if you're in recovery and not in marriage or relationship therapy and you need it, this is one of the reasons why to consider it. One of the most effective things at keeping a system or an argument slowed down is to have a co-regulating system. So the two of us are bought into the objective that we want to feel safe with each other. So we help each other with that. If I see you revving up, I can give you a signal that you're revving up and it's not feeling safe. And we've talked enough about that ahead of time where you're going to yield. You're going to say, you're right. I probably need to go for a walk before we can continue this conversation. That can keep the system slow because you're watching each other's back and you're watching each other's blind sides, or blind spots. That's what Dr. Rob writes about. That's what prodependence is I'm invested in an interdependent relationship. We're helping each other, we're relying on each other. If you can get that kind of buy-in, or you can get that kind of willingness in your relationship, in my opinion, there's very few places that you can't prepare to go together, even if they're scary or overwhelming or they bring up anger. Because at the end of the day, you know that you're in a system where you want to support each other and you want to have each other's back. You want to help each other through emotionally difficult things. So part of maintaining this slowing it down and knowing who you're working with is make sure you do your homework. Relationships don't just come naturally for us. In fact, our brains, they're wired for love and attachment, but they're more wired for war and conflict. At the end of the day, left unchecked, we will default to protecting ourselves at the expense of everybody else. So in your relationships, if you are not consciously aware of who you're with and what they're doing, you'll read a lot of what they do as like dire threat, and you'll get on a war footing with them. So make sure that you know what you know about the person you're in a relationship with. What do you know about the family that they grew up in? And not in a sense so that you can blame them for every argument, but do you know them so that you understand what their vulnerabilities are and what they struggle with? Because those are the spots where kind of going through a conflict without awareness, those spots where a partner shows a vulnerability, that's where we tend to fight them, when what we might want to do is care for them or support them if we want the system to work out. why are they the way that they are? What happened in their relationships that helps explain why they respond the way that they do? And what do they really want in the relationship? You and your partner may not have the same objectives in your relationship. My guess is you don't, unless you've sat down and explicitly spelled them out. This is what we want together, and we both agree to this. You assume your partner wants what you want, or you hope your partner wants what you want, but they might not. And so understanding their objectives and what they want out of the relationship, it can help you to know how to navigate relationship difficulties. Um, this last point, it actually comes before the point that I just made, do your homework on your partner, but I wanted to end on this because it's of utmost importance. And I didn't want to get the feeling that we're just skipping over it. First, you have to do your homework on yourself. You have to be committed to that. In the 12 steps, they talk about it as taking your own inventory. So do you know who you are really? Or do you just know what you like and some of the things that you hope you are? Do you know where you stand in relationships and why you stand there? Do you know your own history of why relationships feel the way that they do? Why you hope the way that you do? Why you fight the way that you do? Why you get scared the way that you do? Do you know why you want this relationship? Again, some of the reasons why we really want the relationship and what we tell ourselves about what we really want in the relationship, sometimes those can be very different. And what we really want in the relationship may make us feel more vulnerable or less proud, but it's really important to own that. I remember a job that I had a long time ago, and I felt like I would tell myself, I'm here because we're doing good work and I believe in what this is. And really, at the end of the day, what I had to square with is I like the paycheck, and that's about it. All all of those other reasons that I had, they were the reasons why I wanted to be there, but they weren't the reasons why I was really there. And doing my own homework on that and getting square with that helped me make a choice where I could not only support my own health, but I could also support the health of the organization, because I realized I wasn't bought into the organization's mission. And by staying there and thinking that I was actually working against it instead of supporting it. And I want to be in relationships where there's support, not working against, not adversarial relationships. So that is taking it slow, knowing what you're working with. That's the distilled wisdom about relationships I got from digging in the dirt all weekend.
Thank you, John. I want to go like learn about trails now. I really do. And you know, I have a bad back. There's no way I'm getting out there and working on trails with you. But what I really heard from this was keep the big picture in mind. And you know, and to keep the big picture in mind, we really have to slow down and look at ourselves and our partners and you know, our objectives. But you know, it's that 10,000-foot view that will, you know, as an addict, it's never the big things that trip me up. It's the little things that trip me up. You know, when I'm confronted with something big, I immediately look at the big picture. But you know, some little thing will trigger me. I'm much more likely to relapse over something tiny than something big. And it seems to me that relationships may run on the same way. Sometimes it will be, you know, the little thing, you know, that where we forget to look at the big picture and forget to slow down. And then the other thought I had was the longer I'm in recovery and the longer I'm around people like yourself, the more I appreciate 12-step programs, because they have all these goofy little sayings like first things first, and you know, first thought wrong, and one step at a time, and you know, I can't even fathom how many times my first sponsor just looked at me and said, slow down, just slow down, because I wanted to be well yesterday, and I wasn't willing to do the next right step and the next right step, you know, one step at a time to actually get there. So, I mean, as an addict, my addict brain was working and applying this to me instead of couples, but I love that it applies, you know, to the bigger picture of life. You know, all the things I learned in recovery also work in relationships. I think the 12 steps are meant to make us able to have relationships. So
yeah, because at the end of the day, that is a dyad, two people is the minimum sustainable unit in our society. People all by themselves, completely isolated, they don't last mentally, emotionally, even physically. It really takes us and at least one other person to really have a shot at. I would go on a limb and say to have a shot at survival and thriving. Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of research that shows that people who are in happy relationships, however it's defined in a particular study, they live longer, they make more money,
yeah.
they're happier, they have less risk for heart attack, they more likely to survive a natural disaster, they're less susceptible to the common cold. It's just, it goes on and on and on. When we feel a part of, we're healthier and happier. When we feel apart from, we're not.
And the thing that I really like about taking relationship principles and generalizing them out. So this weekend I largely learned how to work with the Forest Service, basically how to approach them so they could have confidence in me and my organization. It's actually not too different from how I work with colleagues. It's not too different from how I work with my spouse. It's not too different from how I work with my kids. So the recovery opportunity is you can practice it at home and it will help you at work. You can practice it in recovery and it will help you at home. You can practice at work and it will help you in recovery. Like these are not specialized pigeonholed skills. There might be some nuances in how you do it, but the principles are the same. And we have relationships all over the place that we can practice those in.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We've got to type your questions in the Q&A feature. Get them in early. We got a big group today. So we've already got several questions here already. So let's just jump to those. I just found out my husband is a porn addict, yet I feel I need to be close to him and to have things as normal as possible. I'm not denying or repressing. We are both doing the work. Is this unhealthy or doing his recovery a disservice because he might think I won't leave no matter what he does, despite telling him he's on probation? Interesting.
No, this is not unhealthy. This is actually, I think, holding a real tension that's actually really difficult to hold. You've really betrayed me. You've really messed up, and I still need you. That's not necessarily unhealthy or even codependent. Codependency is a relationship that goes one way. If I'm the only person that feels this way and you could care less about how you've impacted me, there's a problem there, but the problem may not lie with you. It's a really natural thing. Again, the minimum sustainable number to survive is two. So this I still need you, that comes from a very real place. It's not sick, it's not wrong. Um, his recovery isn't going to happen because of consequences that can be exposed externally. His recovery will happen based on how uncomfortable he lets himself be with the life that he's created for himself. And quite honestly, what I've seen in addicts, what I've had in my own experience is there was no amount of external pressure that got me to feel it in the way that I felt it, just letting myself go inside. So I actually, when I'm working with couples, I wouldn't say often I have to overtly discourage it, but I would say never do I see a reason for a spouse to say to a spouse, you need to come up with some consequences for what your partner's doing here to help him get it. If you need to withdraw to a space that's safe for you psychologically or physically, that's different. That's about you, not about your partner. Um, that intense need of we still need to be close, we need to have a regulated relationship, that's a basic human need, and I think it's a good aspiration. Depending on where you're reading recovery material, that could be diagnosed as anywhere from sick to just not helpful. I think Dr. Rob's book Prodependence is really good at explaining this feeling here and helping you to recognize that it has very healthy roots. It's a good healthy drive, and there's ways to, just like any other good healthy drive, like take sex or your drive for food, there's ways to support that in a healthy way, and there's ways to um, there's ways to let it ruin your life, but it doesn't, that drive by itself is not a bad or unhealthy thing.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with loving somebody who has a problem. There's nothing inherently wrong with staying with and supporting a person who has a problem, as long as you're taking care of yourself as well. Um, yeah, John mentioned Prodependence, Dr. Rob's book. I definitely would pick up that book because it's written. Dr. Rob wrote it for basically spouses of addicts, but really spouses of sex addicts. But it certainly generalizes out. But yeah, continuing to love somebody and to need somebody is not. Don't let anybody tell you you're doing something wrong because you continue to love somebody. There might be ways to go about it that are more helpful to you and to your partner, but you can learn that through therapy and support groups and things like that.
Yeah.
Next question here. Get your questions in early because we got a big group today. This is cool. My husband and I are working on an intimacy plan to bring us closer together again during our recovery. We've split it into mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional areas. Any advice for us while we work on this? Any resources or programs you could recommend? Great question.
Yeah, I love this. It sounds like a really solid start in the beginning. It sounds like you've done a lot of your homework and are finding some good places to start. That's where I guess my advice is know that this is a process. It's not like baking a cake. There's not a recipe for it. It's more finding things that help support you and your partner's process in building intimacy. So there's a lot that's written about that. Some of it's very good, some of it's crap. And I think whether it's good or crap, it depends on whether or not it works for you. Um, so instead of taking any advice as a prescription, this is what will get us well, it's here's what we're willing to try. And I would say anything that you're going to try, give it a trial period. Here's what we intend to do. Let's measure our progress and engagement and let's see how it feels. You may know after one go round with some kind of intimacy building exercise whether that's something you're going to do more of or whether that didn't work very well. Some resources that I really like for intimacy building. I'm on a bit of a Stan Tatkin kick right now. His psychobiological approach to couples therapy. It's less about what are you going to talk about and more about how do your bodies do when you're together. So his books, Wired for Love, We Do. Dr. Rob's had him on his podcast at least once or twice. His material's really good at that. This is a bit of a, I guess you'd call it like an off-label use, but the book Sexual Anorexia by Patrick Carnes, the last half of that book is all about dimensions of positive sexuality, understanding how yours formed, daily practices for building that. And when I say positive sexuality, I'm not just talking about what you do in the bedroom or what you do with your body. It's also how you understand yourself. So the last half of that book can be an incredible resource for understanding and deepening intimacy. The 12-step fellowship Recovering Couples Anonymous. That's the whole aim of that 12-step fellowship, is to take couples who are in recovery, to deepen their recovery together, to help them navigate building intimacy. But the big thing is keep in mind that it's a process, not a destination. So find things that you both feel like help your journey along. Be willing to experiment. Be willing to fail spectacularly. You may try something that somebody else swears by, and it may be like an awful experience for you and your partner. Take it with a grain of salt, learn from it, figure out what you need to adjust or why that didn't work for you, and just keep looking for those opportunities to build those parts of your relationship.
Yeah, I typed those into the chat feature. I added Masters and Johnson, the Sensate focus exercises, which can be really helpful. I did want to note that, and maybe John, you can address this a little bit, intimacy does not necessarily mean sex.
Right. I am a stickler for this in the therapy room, like to the point where I think some of my couples are really annoyed with me when they start talk about we were intimate. I'll kind of play dumb sometimes, and I'll say, "Oh, so you looked in each other's eyes, or you talked about your fears." Well, no, we tried to have sex and we weren't talking at all or looking at each other. Oh, okay, well, you were having sex, not intimacy, because you can be sexual without intimacy. I mean, that's kind of what sex addiction is.
I was going to say, nobody knows
Um,
that better than a
so,
sex addict. Yeah.
right, they are very, very different things. And that would be a place to start is, be accountable on your language. If you want to improve your sex life, say you want to improve your sex life. If you want to improve your intimacy, make sure that you're targeting intimacy, not just a mind-blowing experience in the bedroom. Now, I would say that intimacy really lays the foundation for more of those mind-blowing experiences, but they definitely are not the same thing, and it's important to know what it is you're working on exactly.
Yeah, and somebody just asked for links. I did not put links in the chat feature, but you can just Google all that stuff. It'll pop up for you. I wanted to ask
Yep.
another question off this question, John. They've split their intimacy plan into mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. Should they consider adding sexual, or maybe that comes under physical, um, or hold off until they're
Um,
ready, or where does that fall in there?
I would say those I would say again, physical and sexual are two different things. And again, we have a lot of euphemisms for sex in our society. And I think that's part of why it's really hard to develop it in a healthy way because we don't really ever talk about it directly. Um, so one of the reasons why I like category headings like that is because it kind of challenges you to look at some different ways of connecting and being intimate. Um, and I would definitely put sexual in there as a challenge. You may not be ready for that challenge yet. It's a big one. Developing in some of those other areas might help lay some of the groundwork for developing some sexual intimacy. But I would definitely have that on your radar, at least if you put it on your radar now and you both are saying like, I don't think we're ready to go there. That's okay. You can honor that for now. Just know that it'll come up at some point and you will like you're building up to those more difficult parts of intimacy. Financial is another section of intimacy that I think is critical for couples to um, have on their intimacy plan because there's two things that will derail a relationship faster than anything else, and that's sex and money.
Yeah. So next question here, is aggressive behavior, door slamming, yelling, degrading comments, swears, slurs, destroying property, etc., typical amongst MEM? I don't know what MEM means. John, do you?
Mother and mesh men.
Mother and mesh men, thank you. What processes might help? I share my fears from these behaviors, and my mother enmeshed male spouse commits to leaving instead of committing to get help or do some sort of recovery work, which is what I'd hope for. Is there hope? Is there a process that could help, like neurofeedback, or would it be advisable to divorce and fight for custody? So we assume there are kids here.
Yeah, I'll start with that last one. I would not advise to divorce and fight for custody, not because I don't believe in it or that it doesn't help in some situations. That's way too personal of a decision for me to give out advice on that, especially in this forum. I will say that those behaviors, the slamming, the yelling, degrading, dismissing comments, mesh men, I wouldn't say with any higher prevalence that I see in any other men that I work with. Those behaviors are abusive behaviors, psychologically, physically, emotionally abusive behaviors. So there's a couple of places this can go in relationships. It really depends on what kind of abuse it is and not what's happening, but why it's happening. So situational abuse is when the pressure of the moment gets larger than one or both of us can handle, and one or both of us kind of go off our rockers. Situational abuse can be helped by things like neurofeedback, interoception, which means being able to tell what your body rhythms are doing, grounding, soothing, calming techniques. So if this is about like situations get heated and we don't know how to regulate ourselves or regulate each other, there's definitely hope there. The other type of abuse we see in relationships, we call it characterological abuse. And that's more about a person who is more on the antisocial spectrum. They do what they do to keep you in your place. They do what they do to wall themselves off and to not actually engage in a relationship. Um, that kind of abuse, according to the research, it really doesn't change. Now, again, that comes back to the question, should I leave or not? Um, there are ways, I think, to stay in any relationship, regardless of what kind of abuse it is. There's not a right answer here. I think it's important to educate yourself on what this is and what you can do, regardless of whether or not your partner chooses something. Um, in a situation like this, just when you say, is there hope? Like, would neurofeedback help? Um, I think putting it out there, if asking your partner if they'd be willing to look into some solutions for being able to calm down when they're angry. Um, and I would phrase it almost just like that. Are you open to looking into that? This can get pretty scary for me. In a moment when they're calm, that may be as far as it goes. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's specific to mother and mesh men. It's definitely abusive behavior. And the important thing is that you are able to provide some safety for yourself and know how to get safe before, during, and after these situations.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear you're having to deal with that. Next one here. My spouse has found certain text of me texting others for the past couple of years. She suspects that I've met people in person, but I deny it. I am afraid that if she knows the truth, it would break her. Is it important to disclose if she is not asking about it now and wants me to recover? If I recover and never do this again, then do I need to disclose? I feel by doing so, I am putting a burden on me that is now on her.
Yeah. This is a tough situation, and I'll just, I'll just point out one thing in how this is written. Up until the very end, the last sentence, I feel by doing so, I'm putting my burden on that's now on me, on her. It's really legalistic before that. It's kind of as well, if A, then B, but maybe C, but sometimes D. Um, that's indicative to me of some denial thinking. And by denial, I don't mean that you're lying, but I mean that denial is when we're trying to mold reality in the way that we want to see it rather than the way that it is. The reason why in addiction recovery we hammer so much on denial is because you can't find peace for yourself or anybody else if you're living out of touch with reality. Um, so a couple things that jump out to me here. Um, Simply going to your spouse and saying, here's everything that I've done, and because I've done this, you need to know. That can be an act of abuse too, because your spouse has a right to determine what they want to know and what they don't want to know. So that's an important part of the equation here. However, what I see with most addicts, if their spouse doesn't want to know about it, there's something in them, especially early in recovery, that says, well, then I'm off scot-free on this. She doesn't want to know about it. I don't have to look any closer about it. Her wanting to know and what you need to work on are two separate things. So I would, in situations like this, what I recommend is that you move forward in your recovery as close to the feeling as possible of, if I don't get honest, I won't be able to do this. If I'm not committed to honesty and transparency, my recovery will not last. I've worked with some clients whose spouses have said, I want to know nothing about this. So they get honest with a sponsor, they get honest with me, their therapist, they get honest with their therapy groups, and they work on cultivating a willingness. If my spouse came to me and said, hey, I need to know this, or have you ever, I want to be in a position where I would tell them the truth, because I don't want to keep hurting them by not giving them a choice in our relationship. And what I mean by not giving them a choice, it's a very common fear when you say, I'm worried that if they knew the truth, it would break them. It might. But the fact of the matter is, your spouse is the only person who gets to determine whether or not they want to be broken or not. You don't get to make that choice for them. Or they're the only person who can determine whether or not they really want to be with you, warts and all. You don't get to make that choice for them. And when we as addicts in recovery, when we make these kind of behind the scenes deal, well, I'm not going to tell you, you don't need to know. Essentially what we're taking from our partner is their ability to say yes or no about it. So I would work on your recovery relationships, get a good sponsor, get a good group, get accountable and honest with them. Um, if your spouse, you said your spouse found certain texts, um, get into some marriage therapy with a qualified therapist, get into your own individual therapy. And it might take some time for your spouse to decide exactly what she wants to know and when she wants to know it. You know what the secrets are, though. And regardless of whether you talk to your spouse or not, you have to get honest. Or what is it they say in Alcoholics Anonymous? Half measures availed us nothing. It's a half measure if you're determining in the beginning what's relevant and what's not.
Yeah, and most betrayed partners ultimately find that they are more upset about the secrets and lies than about the actual behavior. So that's issue number one. And if I was the cheating partner and my betrayed partner didn't want to know the truth, at least on a general level, I would be worried about my betrayed partner, about what kind of connection can I actually have with this person. If he or she doesn't want to know, at least in a general way, the whole truth. Because for me, a relationship is built on honesty and mutual trust. And after cheating, we need to get it out. This is my opinion here, and feel free to disagree, but we need to get it out so we can get to ground zero and rebuild trust. I just don't know how you can rebuild trust if she doesn't know everything.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. And
my
that's,
opinion, but John, you may disagree, and feel free.
no, I would say I really appreciate that point, Scott, that um, I think it's concerning in a relationship when partners say, I just won't, la, 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 like this part of the relationship doesn't exist. Because part of that dyad that works is we've signed up for each other and to support each other as we are now, not by who we could be. And there's a misattunement in a relationship where we willfully want to close our eyes to what's happening in our partner's life. Now, the degree of information that we want to know or is helpful, that is different from person to person. But that every client that I've worked with whose spouse did not want to engage in recovery, at some point that person said something like, I feel like there's only so far I can go in my own recovery without having my relationship engaged to the same degree. And I think that's true. um,
Yeah. Next one here. My husband enjoys pornography. But he states what he enjoys is the privacy of the screen, not to look at people in public. I find myself constantly pointing out women or scenes or advertisement, asking if it triggers him and wanting to get his thoughts, advice, insight.
I'm fascinated to know how your husband experiences you asking him, does that trigger you?
Yeah.
um, and I don't mean that he's hating it inside and pointing, like, I'm genuinely curious what's that like for him. Because again, I think it really depends on who you're with, that 10,000 foot view. It depends on who you are. I also wonder what that does for you to be on that kind of vigilance and wondering, are you triggered? Are you triggered? Are you triggered? Um, it could be as benign as this is a semi-entertaining, informative, intellectual exercise. What is it about this person? Or it could be like some hypervigilance. It could be some, I don't feel safe and I need to know exactly what's going on in your head. Um, so I guess that would be the advice is, first of all, go inside you and ask, what's happening here? Why am I doing this? And again, not because I'm looking at this and saying, oh my gosh, that's so bad. I'm not coming from there at all. It's curious to me. It's interesting to me. So I would start there. And then I might, take a risk and ask your spouse, what is it like for you when I ask you if you're triggered? What goes on inside of you? I think those are the building blocks to start to understand, is this something that's helpful or not? You really have to know what both of your experiences are in this. A lot of times in recovery, we do things, whether you're an addict in recovery or a spouse, a lot of times we almost intuitively come across these things that we do, and it's not because we have a great plan for it. It's just because it's what we do. So for example, in my trail building class, I learned how to use a tool called a clinometer. It measures incline percent. And it's actually the most important tool in trail building, not the shovel, not the, the tamper or the rake, because it tells me how steep is this slope that I'm planning. Your eyes will always lie to you, but the instrument won't. So to know what's really going on underneath your feet and in the terrain, so to speak, that's what's important. Not what does this look like to me or what do I hope it feels like. It's what's actually going on here. And we often need some overt verification of that. Our assumptions usually, and this Stan Tatkin will talk about this a lot, our assumptions are usually wrong. So you really, I would say the advice is check it out, search yourself, ask your spouse.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this kind of felt like an extension of, the betrayed partners need to know. I need to get to ground zero. I need to know what I'm dealing with so that I can make decisions in my own head about how I want to move forward. And, I want to know what I should be afraid of and what I shouldn't be afraid of, that kind of thing. There's the honesty, the disclosure that needs to happen. But I would caution against, if this feels like, a paper cut every time he says yes or no or whatever, you may want to, you can bleed to death from paper cuts. I would caution you to pay attention to,
Yeah.
Does this hurt me? How does this impact me when I ask this question? And maybe schedule a formal therapeutic disclosure down the line at some point so you can get to ground zero, but not in a ouch, ouch, ouch paper cut way.
Yep.
Next one here. I don't think we're going to get to all of our questions today, but we'll try here. Jonathan, thank you for your volunteer work. I belong to a similar type of service group, and we use our horses mostly to clear downfall on wilderness trails. Thank you. That's lovely. I've heard over and over that humans are built for love and connection. Is there a circumstance where that doesn't apply? What about no empathy? Or is it only because they are with the wrong person? I have been married to my sex addiction partner for 39 years, and he now says he doesn't respect me and can't tell if he has ever loved me or even cared for me.
I'm going to try to pick up the pace on responses so that we can get to as many of these as possible. I would say, yes, there are circumstances where that doesn't apply, like cortical deficiencies, things like severe pervasive developmental disorder, what we used to call autism. There can be organic reasons why someone doesn't connect with, those love and bonding feelings in a relationship. Things like psychopathy and sociopathy. There's actual deficits in the brain structures that don't allow for that consideration of another to happen. Those are the exception, though, not the rule. Just because your spouse doesn't demonstrate that with you, or maybe even in general, it doesn't mean that there's an organic deficiency. I would say love means something different to everybody. And again, your partner may feel like they feel love and connection in other places, and maybe not with you, or maybe not in certain circumstances. So it's possible where someone can't feel love and connection, but I guess the short answer is that's not always the reason why it's not happening in a relationship. There can also be trauma that gets in the way of that. The feelings of familiarity, affection, they can be unbearable for someone because of their attachment history.
And addicts can behave like they have no empathy, or they're on addicts can behave like all those things Jonathan just mentioned, as part of the addiction, too. So he may be really active in the addiction right now and behaving this way.
Yeah.
My sex addicted husband and I have 1 year of healing behind us. We've gone through disclosure. At what point should we start to work on our marriage?
Day one. And that's not your fault. I think a lot of the pervading wisdom out there is you get healthy and you get with a qualified, competent therapist, you can start relationship work from day one and it can help. So I would start that search now. Post disclosure is definitely a critical time. A year of healing is a really solid foundation. Get in with a good therapist as fast as possible. I know Scott and the team at Seeking Integrity, they know so many people across the country, across the world. They'd be a good resource to reach out to find someone who would be good in your area.
Yeah, if you've gone through disclosure, they probably have a therapist who facilitated that, I hope. But if not, contact us at Seeking Integrity. Tammy will get back to you and recommend a therapist for sure. This is a follow-up to our abusive behaviors question earlier. She says, so if I'm to stay safe in the relationship, I need to make myself safe in those moments with physical/emotional boundaries. Is that kind of right? So how can she stay safe?
Yeah, that's what it is. At the end of the day, your partner will choose to do what they do in those situations, whatever the reason is. If it's they're dysregulated or it's a power and control thing, boundaries aren't about what you ask another person to do. They're really about bottom line, what am I going to do to get safe and grounded? So that might look like, when he's slamming cabinets or yelling and demeaning, that may look like I'm going to pack up the kids and we're going to go to the park, or we're going to go to my mom's house, or you know we're going to leave this area so that you can't be doing that to us right now, and that's how I'm going to get safe. um, yeah, so that's exactly what those are. Focus on what you can control, what you can do in those situations.
Yeah, and I always tell people when I'm working with them, boundaries are not about you or your behavior. Boundaries are about my behavior. Boundaries are about how I will
Yep.
respond when to any given stimulus. And I also often will tell them boundaries aren't about keeping other people out. They're
Yep.
about finding ways to let them in safely.
Yep,
I
they're the
think that's
road.
really important in an abusive relationship. How can I let you in safely?
Yep.
So, okay, we may get through them all today. Hello, my partner is a sex and love addict. He decided to break up before having the disclosure. After the disclosure, he decided to keep working on his own SLAA meetings, webinars, therapy, etc. And I am doing the same for betrayed partners, trying to understand his addiction as well as healing on my own. We both decided to take it slow. He moved out, but how can we know that we have the sufficient tools or what it takes to come back together and keep working as a couple? He's afraid of coming back together too soon and that things won't work out.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, this is where I would suggest having someone or someones to help that can be what we call process observers. So relationship histories kind of dictate where we're going to go, whether or not we want to go there. So if you had an incredibly conflictual, like lack of trust relationship with someone that you lived with for a long time, even if you separate for a year, 6 months, 3 months, whatever, and come back together, chances are without some outside eyes, outside help, you're probably going to settle into what you did before. Because human beings are creatures of habit, and we take all of these little cues from the environment and from each other. So a qualified marriage therapist is really, really important here. That will help to keep the process slow. We have a desire to come back together. We don't trust ourselves to do that on our own. We need some help getting launched. We need some help stabilizing the flight. We need some help landing this. So some qualified help. Even there's some really great couples intensives that are happening, via Zoom and things like that. Just get some kind of outside eyes, some kind of outside structure to help you not just follow your gut on how is this going to work, but let's take a pattern, let's take a blueprint and get started that way. To get out of these kind of normal but unhelpful interactions, we really have to challenge ourselves to start in a different way. And that outside observer, that fair witness, like I talked about before, that can help hold the accountability for, are we actually taking this slow? or are we just telling ourselves that moving back in within a week and, you know, spending a total of 3 hours together before deciding to move back in? We're telling ourselves that's taking it slower. We'll take it slow after that. But, you know, that outside view can really help to challenge some of those natural tendencies, if you're really wanting to take it slow.
Yeah, the heat of the moment for you or your partner is not a great time to make decisions, you know, and you know, both parties are on a roller coaster in the early part of recovery, and it's not always the same roller coaster. So you may want to get back together today, and he doesn't, and then tomorrow he wants to get back together, and you don't, and that's why you take it slow. You give the roller coasters time to get in sync, and then you know, and then to maybe end or at least, you know, get on the little kiddie roller coaster instead of the big one. Before you make
Yeah.
decisions.
In Stan Tatkin's book, Wired for Love, he talks about agreed upon relationship, governing principles of a relationship. And this is where you and your partner actually sit down and hash out what are the rules that are going to govern our relationship. And you have to come up with them mutually. So it's not me saying, my rule is you can't eat frozen burritos. It's together we're deciding what this relationship needs to feel like. And when one of us is outside of those governing principles, we get to call each other on it, and the person who's outside the principle yields. So I have a couple that I'm working with right now, and one of their governing principles is we follow through on what we said we would do, both individually and together. Well, their biggest struggle isn't them individually following through, it's as a couple. You know, so they may say, we're not going to have serious conversations after 10 p.m. But when they find themselves, even just one night up until 1 or 2 in the morning, having this serious conversation that's ineffective, they have to come back to marriage therapy and they have to say, all right, John, we set this goal for ourselves and we're not doing it. We have to be accountable. We have to get to the bottom of why we can't hold this boundary together for each other. So that idea of what are the governing principles of our relationship, can we actually hash that out? What are the safe parameters? And then can we establish some accountability between each other, and maybe in this situation with some qualified help, can we be accountable to those parameters that we've set up so that we can actually do the work that we are saying we're here to do with each other?
It's 11 o'clock and I have another meeting that starts right now. So I'm going to
Right.
have to cut us off. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, John. And we'll see you all again in a couple of weeks.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.